Hello and good morning. My name is Marilyn Wagner and I am the Chief Experience Officer of IDB Global Federal Credit Union. We are so happy to have you here with us today at the Credit Union's first ever LinkedIn Live for Women's History Month. We want to let you know that this year's theme is women who advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, which aligns really well with the credit union's one value that says we lead and we treat everyone with diversity, equity, inclusion, diversity, and respect. We want to make sure that you know that the women of our organization, the credit union, comprise 62% of our workforce. And in totality, we have a group of individuals who work and represent 15 nationalities. It is for this reason that we are so inspired to lead a conversation and a panel today entitled, She Leads, Inspiring the Next Generation. Some housekeeping items. We want to make sure that we take your questions, so please make sure you put them in the chat. The panel will be held in English and the questions will be answered in English. However, if you feel that you would like to place a question in Spanish, please be sure to do so in the chat and we will translate it. Now, it is my honor and my privilege to introduce to you your moderator, Maria Valeria Sambarain. She is the lead officer of the Controllership Division of IDB Invest. And more important to me and to the credit union, she is our board chair of the governing board of directors. Maria Valeria, I pass it along to you.
Thank you for your kind words, Marilyn, and I'm really honored to be here today in this discussion. And I'm truly humbled for the panelists we have assembled for this conversation today. Here with us today we have Daisy Andrades. Daisy is IT Principal Specialist and Business Partner at the IDB. Daisy is also a member of the Board of Directors. We have Elise Roe. Elise is HR Senior Advisor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion of the IDB Group. Diego Fleiban. Diego is Director of Financial Institutions of the Southern Cone at IDB Invest. He is our brave lone male voice today in this panel. Diego is also a member of the Board of Directors of the Credit Union. And last but not least, Yolanda Strong. Yolanda is Head of Connections and Partnerships at IDB Lab. Thank you all for being here today. Today, during this conversation, we will share their valuable insights on various topics. We will discuss how to become an effective leader and advocate for diversity and inclusion, especially on historically male-dominated financial institutions. We will tackle how to implement and incentivize ethical practices for gender equality, and how to create a culture of accountability and transparency. Of course, we will hear their personal stories of empowerment and mentorship. Now I'm already inspired by all this introduction, and I would like to jump in on the questions we have for our panelists. First question, what are the key characteristics of a leader who actively advocates for diversity and inclusion in the workplace? I would like to invite Daisy to share her thoughts on this question.
Thank you, Valeria. Thank you for that question. And first, I want to thank Marilyn for inviting us to this panel. I am so honored to be here with a great group of professionals from the IDB Group to talk about this important topic, one that I think it's of most importance for the IDB Group as well as the credit union. I also wanted to answer this question thinking of two very important things that in my last 2 years as in the IT department we've been really focusing on is awareness. First, as a leader, you need to be aware of your biases, personal biases, cultural biases, and I think in a diverse organization, this very unconscious awarenesses usually come up in conversations, sometimes in team meetings. So being able to point them out and be an advocate to say, hey, that doesn't sound so right, and point these things out, I think are super important. So having the awareness. Now, another important characteristic is presence. As leaders, we jump from one meeting to another meeting, from topic to topic. We're constantly multitasking, hopefully not too much, but we do that a lot. And sometimes being present with your team, understanding, being curious of what's going on, whether it's a young woman who's coming back from maternity leave or a husband that has to take care of his wife or kids that sometimes have challenging situations. Being able to be present in the employees' lives is super important. So you have curiosity around that. But more importantly, as leaders, we also have to create a psychological workspace. We have to be able to provide an environment where people feel safe to speak up, an environment where they're curious to learn and challenge the status quo. And if you have that, you can also provide a lot of guidance of how to go about in creating a psychological safe environment. So hopefully, as we continue to grow in diversity and inclusion at the IDB group, we also take on these leadership skills and we promote more of these leadership skills from the HR department and from across the different organizational units at the IDB group.
Thank you, Daisy. And as you mentioned, the importance of leaders in an organization, in a society, in a workplace, I would like to go with another question about leaders. And this is about how can leaders effectively challenge existing biases and stereotypes to promote a culture of inclusivity. For this, I would like to invite Elise to share her expertise on the topic.
Thank you so much. And I want to echo what Daisy said. Thank you so much for having us here today. It's such an honor and a pleasure to discuss this important topic. And building also what on Daisy said about being aware, I think the first thing is that you have to be intentional because we all have our biases. The system, the way it currently works, doesn't ensure equitable and diverse opportunities for everybody. So the first step is to be intentional. The second step is to be courageous. And I think holding this discussion today is a great initiative and a great testament of the courage to talk about these issues. And that brings me to the third item, which is fear. Sometimes fear is a good sign. It means that you got to the point where you're about to do a change. And DEI requires change. So sometimes we're a bit scared, we're a bit resistant. So let's use our courage to get into that space because fear is a good sign that something great is going to happen.
That's an interesting perspective, Elise. Thanks for sharing. And I would like to invite also Yolanda to share her experience. I mean, what do you think about this question of leaders and biases and how can leaders create a better work environment, a better community environment?
Yes, thank you so much, Valeria. Thank you also for inviting me to participate on this panel today. It's really a pleasure to be here to share my thoughts and listen to all the great advice and thoughts of others. So for me, I think, leaders, they really have to lead by example. And, Daisy mentioned that being aware of your own biases is really important. I would take it even a step further. I think it's so important to take stock of your team and your organization and see how you're doing in terms of diversity and inclusion and look at how you're doing in terms of bringing people on board who have different backgrounds and perspectives. And also taking a look to see what are your blind spots and are you covering those blind spots and what new perspectives or new people you might need to bring on board to have those blind spots covered. I think that's super important at the IDB. It's very important at credit unions. And having that diverse team is going to protect you against those blind spots and make you more effective. So, at the credit union, having more women on the credit committee, I think is a great idea. I was brought into the credit committee about 2 years ago and, to provide perhaps a perspective on women, on minorities, and that perspective maybe doesn't come from other members who might be able to provide a perspective from somebody who's in a different country or of a different nationality. So I think blending that is really important. But also, it's not enough to just have this diverse team. People have to feel safe. They have to feel valued. They have to feel supported and to be able to actually express themselves in order for that value to be realized, And then kind of looking at my own career and the things I do at the bank, I work a lot with startups in technology. And I think it's so important to give greater visibility to leaders from underrepresented groups. And this can happen in a bunch of different ways. But when we're looking at women, at people of African descent, people of indigenous descent, people with disabilities, sometimes we have to make an effort to have a diverse selection and diverse representation of different groups. Because I think representation really, really matters. And in order to combat those stereotypes and that bias, to me, showing successful examples of people from diverse backgrounds is one of the best ways that you can challenge those types of biases and stereotypes.
Thank you, Yolanda, and a very interesting perspective of how you apply this to your day-to-day in your work. Thanks a lot. I have another question here, sort of about leaders also, and I said the importance of leadership in the work environment, community. How can leaders create a culture of accountability and transparency around gender equity initiatives with their organizations? I would like to invite Diego to answer this question.
Thank you very much, Valeria, and thank you for inviting me to this event and to be the male representative. For me, it's an honor. And responding to your question, I like numbers, as you may know. So first of all, I want to give the compelling argument of why leaders should enable a culture of diversity and gender inclusion. You know that companies that do include gender equity in their executive level are outperforming those that they don't by 36% in terms of profitability. If you go to Latin America, this is even higher. Companies that do include female into higher positions are 44% more profitable, high ROE. So that's a compelling argument, so that we have to start working on this. But going back to transparency and accountability, I think that in terms of transparency, we have to work on two main areas. I think it's very important to be transparent in terms of promotions. That's always a key. And also in salary, we need to pay the same for women and men for the same job. And another number here we have recently done in IDB, Intel did a survey that says that 15% of companies do analyze gender gap issues and address 85%. They don't do anything, and it would be even worse. 28% of companies, they say that they recognize they are paying more to men and to women. That is terrible. So we need to do something about this. And sometimes it's an issue of we can start setting up quotas, as we did in IDB, and I've seen many companies and many stock exchanges doing that. But also, and this was, we addressed the issue of gender biases. We have a lot of gender biases when promoting, of leaders, when promoting, assigning, or appointing women in leadership positions. That's why the thing about accountability in terms of setting commitments, setting KPIs, that's always something that we have addressed. That companies are addressing as well. Again, going back to numbers, 15% of leadership positions are fulfilled by women. That's if you go to the board level, it's 10%. We are at the board of IDB, at Credit Union, we are almost 50-50. So, and 1% of companies have a CEO that is a woman. So that is our improved numbers from 5 years ago, thanks to some policies still lagging behind. Again, probably because of the bias. Maybe you know more than me. And many financial institutions that have a male representative are higher, are working on this issue as well. And on that side, I want to address one issue. Gender equity is inclusive of men. So we need to, if we want to move the needle, we need to actively involve men as they are holding financial institutions most of the key positions. We need to move them to actively participate in this agenda so that we can address the issue. The good thing is there are a lot of men willing to take that role, and we need to create an environment that is welcoming and considers that men are crucial allies as well.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you for that quantitative perspective. And I would also like to invite Elise to give us perhaps the human resources perspective on question.
I'm not going to repeat everything Diego said because that was really spot on. Well done summarizing the business case for DEI is very strong, especially for us as a development bank. We know we cannot achieve our mission without a diverse workforce. I love the data approach as well. And I agree. I think that now at the IDB group, we know where we want to get. And that was thanks to a very strong analysis of data. And now it's like, okay, we know where we want to be. How do we get there? And how are we using an intersectional lens? Because when we look at women and men, we also look at women who are Afro-descent and men who are indigenous. There are so many categories that we want to represent in our workforce so we can better deliver the projects to the region. I think one of the really important aspects is building on this data. Once we've identified a barrier or a gap, we need to address it. So I like, Diego, you mentioned, for example, the salary gap. We did EDGE certification for the IDB group last year, and we saw that there is no unexplained gender gap. So I think that's some solid foundations we can build on to show that progress is possible. Another really important aspect is to build trust. Especially when we talk about data, some of our identities are sensitive, and maybe we'll talk about the ethical aspects of this later, but we want to make sure that our workforce feels safe to self-identify and has enabling work environments that enable these discussions and also these then tracking the data. You mentioned promotions, right? So we have targets to make sure that we're promoting equitably. And I think it's really important to remember that at the end of the day, we're doing this so that everybody feels they can bring their true self to work. You know, this feeling of inclusion and this feeling of belonging, we know that that's how the workforce can perform better. That's how we're going to be able to deliver projects to our clients and our regions. So this feeling of inclusion and hearing different voices, and I know, Yolanda, you mentioned that earlier. I think that's really important, right? Whose voices are we hearing and amplifying? And if there's a silence somewhere, how do we bring those people in? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Liz. And before jumping to the next question, I'd like to share a comment we received from Lorena Nunez regarding bias. And Lorena says, bias awareness, presence, and psychic safety creates a transparency culture. Great contribution nowadays. Thank you, Lorena, for sharing with us. Going to the next question, and this is more towards mentorship and the importance that also mentorship have in institutions. I have a following question to share with you. Can you tell us a personal experience where mentorship or sponsorship play a significant role in your professional development, particularly in advocating gender equity? Daisy, could you share with us experience in this mentorship context?
Yes, thank you so much. First, I want to start off by saying that mentorship for me is one of the greatest tools that we can have in the organization. It is a way to give back based if you are a mentor, and if you're a mentee, it's a good way to integrate within the organization. I think the IDB has the mentorship program for well over 10 years, and I was actually one of the first cohort, and I benefit greatly from it. I've learned a lot, both as a mentor and as a mentee. But going back a little bit of what Diego and the data approach here, I think that one of the things in order to cultivate this gender gap is also to mentor the people who are underrepresented and bringing them up the chain is super important. And mentorship and these programs are one of the key aspects of doing that. Being able to grow your network, being able to focus on a specific skill set, being able to learn about the cultural ways of working in an organization like ours is super important. So having that mentorship, building the pipeline of the next leaders is very important as we progress to look at the data and numbers. And so going back in terms of, in my personal experience, I have two that I think I wanted to call out. First, when I started a new function, I went and got enrolled into the mentorship program. And the first thing I told my mentors, like, well, I'm so excited, I want to learn something new, and it's a new area for me. And he was a male. He said, calm down. First, do your job right. Get that down, and then you build on that. And I was like, wait, this is so counterintuitive. I want to do something new. And actually, thinking back down the road, I was like, yeah, I was able to focus on the task at hand, focus on building that trust within my team, and then eventually grow into new functions and new things. But if I had not taken on that, advice, probably it wouldn't have worked out so well. So it was a very good advice at that time when I was, beginning to move to different areas. And then regarding sponsorship, I think it's also another equally important program or activities that we do. It's not very formal, I think, at the IDB, but it is something that I've experienced. Having someone that can advocate for you at the table, to propose you for a new project, to propose for you to move forward in a new initiative, or that can call out and say, hey, maybe we should touch base with Daisy, who's done that in the past. So having that person to advocate for you, to really entrust you to do the next thing in your career is very important. I had a supervisor, great boss. She said, I want to promote you to the next job level. And at that time I said, oh, thank you, but I know this sounds weird. I don't want the promotion because I felt that I would be limiting my career progression if I moved to the next level in that function. And she said, you know what, I respect that, but I'm gonna put you with a mentor. And so my mentor, she was like, I totally understand that. She said, but think of this as more of an equivalence of a grade and pay. She said, you are the only female in a team of four. The three are males. And she said, this is not really so much about you limiting yourself, but you having that equality at the table. And sometimes the grade provides that for you. So I thought about it. I didn't get the promotion that year, by the way. And then I came back and I used, again, the mentorship program. I used my network and I did rehearsals and different things for my interview for the next panel, in which then I got the promotion. But the thing that stuck to me was that my mentor said that already organizations give a lot of constraints. You have to meet certain criteria. Sometimes you have to have certain grade, time and grade. There's a lot of constraints. Why do you put more constraints on yourself? And sometimes as women, we end up doing that, whether it's our fear, like you mentioned, whether we don't have the backing from a sponsor. So not having those constraints on yourself is super important. And mentorship and sponsorships are the two tools that can enable you to support you in your career moving forward.
Excellent, Daisy. Thank you for sharing your experience. I'm sure we can all learn from that and identify ourselves with some aspects of what you just shared with us. And following on that importance of mentorship programs, I have here another question is, how can mentorship programs be structured to support the advancement of women and other unrepresented groups in the workplace effectively? And I would like to ask Elise, you have your experience in HR, you have worked a lot on mentorship programs. Basically, how to help women and underrepresented groups to create this right mentorship program.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Daisy, for what you shared, because my first point, again, is that we have to be intentional as an organization. So you said, yes, the individual can take some steps, but the organization also has to remove certain barriers that we've put artificially to historically limit probably the advancement of these underrepresented groups. So one of the things, so be intentional in the mentorship program, and then check the outcome. After you finish the mentoring program, sometimes it's ongoing, but then check what happened afterwards to these individuals that you mentored. Is there a career progression? You're a success story, And I want to know how many Daisies we have in the organization, and I want to know how many Pablos and how many, Chotil or whoever, to make sure that the outcome in the investment is where we want it to be. So that's the second thing. And the last thing I want to mention, I think that the world also is evolving in a space where we should be having this reverse mentorship program. And the current IDB one allows it because you can be paired with somebody who is not necessarily senior. I know personally, I'm learning a lot from somebody in my team on how they are addressing sensitive topics and creating safe spaces for discussion. And that's something that I've learned from somebody who, from a traditional mentoring program, wouldn't have happened, So now we're also trying to do reverse mentoring where, for example, if you're a leader from a dominant group, what can you learn from somebody who's from an underrepresented group? How do you learn from their experience and then make sure that your leadership style is inclusive? So I think these are things that we put in place to make sure that we're creating enabling environments through mentoring program or sponsorship program and other learning programs for underrepresented groups to thrive.
Yeah. Thank you, Liz. I would like to hear from Yolanda on this topic too.
Sure. No, I love Elise's idea of the reverse mentoring. I think that's super creative, and it's a way to make sure you have, a dual flow of information. But, my take on mentoring is that I think that the programs need to be hyper-personalized. And when I say that, I mean that there really needs to be a great match between the mentor and the mentee. And for the mentee, it's important to find a mentor that's doing the thing that you want to do or the thing that you're working toward in your area of interest. And looking at that person, thinking like, are they in a place in their career where I want to be one day? And how are they going to help to guide me on that path, to understand how I can get there? And then not just how I can get there, but like what kind of leadership characteristics do I need to develop as a mentee and as an effective leader and employee? And, building on that, I think sometimes the conversation about mentorship and also leadership, it needs to be more targeted to women and underrepresented groups, because I think the challenges for these groups are different. For women, like Diego mentioned, there's a lot of challenges around the gender pay gap. How do you get around that? It's very challenging. It may not apply to, others. And then also for women, there's the issue of visibility. Like, how do I make myself more visible at work to get more opportunities? And so I feel like this, targeting and kind of hyper-personalization on mentorship programs and leadership programs with advice that's very specific for women and other groups is necessary. And I know the IDB has some programs. They have a women's leadership program. And then recently I participated in what they call the Breakthrough Leadership Program. And this was a program that was first launched last year for people in underrepresented groups to have access to leadership skills, to be able to understand the complexity of navigating organizations. And I think, kudos to the bank. This was a welcome change. They had never had a program like this before, but I look forward to them implementing more programs like this, because I think the messages are very tailored for these underrepresented groups, and that's important. And then lastly, just kind of building on what Daisy said about sponsorship, I feel like that's so important. There's a lot of emphasis on mentorship, and I think that that's just one part of the equation, but we need to maybe place more emphasis on sponsorship, because I feel like that's the harder part to get to. The sponsor that's going to create opportunities for you or help to point you in the right direction to get ahead at work, that's going to open doors. And that's a much more intentional and active engagement, and maybe finding ways to formalize that, so that people can have access to more opportunities. And the mentorship, I think, is great, but really having somebody to advocate for you is transformational. And I think, Daisy mentioned that, and now I am experiencing that. Finally, finding a sponsor that is really helping me to move forward in my career I think it's really priceless. So.
Thank you, Yolanda, and thank you for the panelists that addressed this question, because here we see the relationship between mentorship and sponsorship and creating an inclusion, diversity environment. Okay, thank you on that. I have one question here. This is more related to financial institutions. And this is, how can financial institutions, particularly credit unions, better tailor their services to meet the needs of female members? And of course, we have our financial institutions expert here, Diego, and would like to hear from Diego what he thinks about this question.
I'm not talking about the IDB credit union. I'm talking about in general about financial institutions and other credit unions, because we have Marco and he's addressing all these issues. Because the most important thing here, in order to design products and services oriented to women, is the cultural change that we need to tackle. We have talked about unconscious or conscious bias in order to when we appoint leadership positions, but we have seen a lot of unconscious bias while giving a loan. So we recently, I think Parrado has just said that in a recent survey that we did in Chile, women have 18% less chance of getting a loan than men when we apply for a loan with the same characteristics. So that's a problem, even though women are a business by itself because they are better payers. We have seen a lot of information and studies saying that they have 50% less non-performing loans than men. So actually, we are losing. There's a market opportunity there that we are losing because of gender biases, and that's the result of this is women entrepreneurs are not growing. They are not getting the financing they need to grow, and there's an inequality there that's not being tackled. And it's in many cases unconscious. So we are designing a lot of training so that banks start seeing this. It's top down, but you need to work a lot on the commercial force and risk officers in order to address these issues. And I think that's very important in order to understand the market. Is improve data. So we're working a lot with banks, to improve the disaggregated data about GDI. So that's important. We have to adapt the systems to include all the information that they will need to make proper decisions. We need to understand what are the behavior of the different segments, what they need, what are the barriers, what are the market opportunities. So when we have seen successful stories is when banks analyze these issues and design an holistic product offering or a value proposition, that includes products and services and non-financial products and services as well, which is very important to enhance women financing. I think usually what we see and what we all have in financial institutions is products and people trying to be adapted to those products and services. We have to think the other way around. We have to adapt the products and services to the different segments. Women is one. Obviously, we have others. So in our credit union, we are very diverse. In general, financial institutions and credit unions needs to start working on different segments. That's why usually gender is the entry point to a more holistic approach to diversity. That's why we need to start working not only with gender but also with diversity, so that we can include sex, age, sexual orientation, cognitive diversity, etc. So there's a lot to do in order to design products and services. We need to understand our clientele, which is very diverse first.
A very interesting comment, Diego. Thank you. How it is at credit union, how it is at financial institutions, this concept of, top down, bottom up, having the right products to help, the underrepresented members of credit unions and financial institutions. I have one question here that we received, and it's about the ethical considerations. And it says, what ethical considerations should organizations consider when implementing initiatives to promote gender equity? So I would like to invite any member of the panel, if we could like to share what about the ethical consideration of gender equity, to promote gender equity.
I can share a bit about what we're doing at the IDB group. The first thing is when you talk about diversity and people's identity, it has to be voluntary self-identification. So we cannot force, hey, you look like this, hey, you identify as such, right? So we need to create a safe space for people to feel safe to share with us their identity so that then we can have data evidence-based programs. So that's the first one. The other one is really to enforce data privacy and all the legal considerations, because in some of the countries and the regions that we serve, there's certain types of identity that are linked to taboos or safety issues. And so we wouldn't want to put anybody at risk because they shared their identity with us. So having all these systems in place are really important. There's also all the aspects of preventing discrimination that are related to ethics that we want to make sure that we put in place. So we do a lot of training on preventing microaggressions, preventing discrimination, and also making sure we all know where to go if something happens. So prevent and then address any ethical concerns that are related to DI. So it's a really big part of our work.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. I think, we could keep talking the whole day about the importance to having and creating diversity work environment, a diversity community. I think here with our panelists, there was a lot of ideas, there's a lot of put on the table. And this is a call to action. This is a call to, I hope you really take some aspects of the panelists presented today. I like the one that a couple of panelists mentioned, which is about intention. And I think it's a great beginning, okay? So there has to be the intention to create, it has to be a choice. And also, as it was also mentioned, this has to be inclusive. And this is not a gender, like I said, this is, female only. As Diego mentioned, this is also to include males in the picture. And it's a work of the whole organization, of the whole community. So with this, I hope you really take messages for action here. I would like to thank the panelists. Thank you, Yolanda. Thank you, Daisy. Thank you, Elise. And thank you, Diego, for sharing your thoughts, your experience. And have a great day. Thank you.